Welcome, listeners, to Connect the Dots. I'm Alison Rose Levy, and I'm here with you every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Radio Network. Each week on Connect the Dots, we connect the dots between, well, I've been saying this for 10 years, between you, your personal well-being, and everything that's going on in your community, your society, and our ecology here on planet Earth. Each week on the show, we connect the dots between all of those things to look for the ways to create individual, community, societal, and planetary well-being. And of course, at one point early on when I was doing this broadcast, an editor from the Huffington Post said to me, "Oh, you're all over the map in terms of your interests." And I think today more than ever we can see the need for interconnecting all of these things rather than looking at them in silos. And of course, we've been doing that on the show over the last 10 years with different authors, healers, scientists, experts, economists, political folk, all kinds of foodies, all kinds of people coming together to share their aspect of everything that's going on in our interconnected world. And of course, now it's more vital and up front and center for everyone during this time. And I'm delighted, actually, to have returning to the show someone who is offering some terrific opportunities in regard, in terms of understanding, healing, and moving all of this. My guest today is Maya Shetreat, and she's an MD, a neurologist, also an herbalist, an urban farmer, and the author of a best-selling book, The Dirt Cure: Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child. And the book has been translated into 10 languages. Maya has been featured in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Dr. Oz Show, and a whole bunch of wonderful other places. She's the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches terrain medicine and earth-based programs for transformational healing. And we'll be hearing a lot more about that today. This is, I think, Maya, your second appearance on Connect the Dots, and we've been continuing our conversation, off the show in many, many different ways. So it's great to have you back talking about the work that you're doing now, and which, is highly relevant to, I think, what so many of us are thinking about and, recognizing the need and the urgent need to work on. So welcome back, Maya Shetreat, to Connect the Dots.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So, one of the things in some exchanges that we had prior to the show that really struck me in what you're saying, because, as we're looking out at, reports and maps every day of the coronavirus, as we're looking at economic collapse and in the societies, we're looking at a highly beleaguered political system. There are just so many, and the intersection of all of these things, it's extremely challenging for people and overwhelming because it's almost as if we are, suddenly inhabiting a very different society and world. And for many of us also, it's affecting our health and the health of loved ones. And those worries are affecting and infecting all of us. And so one of the things that you mentioned, which I think really right away kind of helps open a door to reframing and looking at all of this for people, you called it a collective period of initiation. I just feel like there's so much in that can help us if we can really come to understand that. Could you tell our listeners, what you mean by that, and what you see there in that regard?
Sure. So I've studied extensively with Indigenous elders and teachers over the years, and with my own family, which has an Indigenous ancestry. And there's something so interesting about these kinds of periods of time. In Indigenous society, it was the shaman or the medicine person that played this unique role of undergoing an initiatory experience, or many, and would go through these periods of what we would call a dark night of the soul, right? And in this process, would experience a sort of dissolution of self, and then would return to reality, common reality with, as someone new and different and really more powerful, and in a sense would connect and learn the language of the earth, they might say, and take on the role of healer leader. And so I think whenever we go through our own initiations, and all of us go through these periods of initiation in our life, usually it could be a kind of loss. It doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Like, for some people, it's a very initiatory experience, for example, to give birth and have a baby, or to, bring a baby into your life, just as one example. But also there can be losses that lead us to that, like, loss of a relationship or a job, or, or of a loved one. And we go through these usually individually, not usually in this collective way. But when that happens, we're kind of catapulted out of the normal everyday existence. And what that does for us, right, because we would never choose those experiences. We would never willingly go into these kinds of experiences, these initiations. But what it does for us when we do, right, to be forced out of the norm, is that we look at the normal, what we've accepted as normal, with new eyes. And what that means also is because so often we live in our normal everyday reality is actually not very good for us in certain ways. It's not necessarily what we need or even what we want, but it's so difficult sometimes to step outside of that, or to make the changes we need to make. They feel too overwhelming or scary or whatever they might feel, that being catapulted out of it, it sort of creates a very fertile ground, not in the easiest way or even in an easy way at all, but it creates this sort of opportunity or invitation to think about, what could be, right? And in that healer leader role, the role of the shaman or the medicine person in society, is to be a bridge between what is and what could be. And so here we are right now in this moment, or this period of intense uncertainty and fear and, kind of chaos. And here we are kind of seeing all the cracks in our society, some of which many of us were already aware of, and have been talking about for a long time. I know you have been, and I have been, but, it's much more apparent now when we're pushed to the edge in this way. And here we are now in this place where we can think, or start to think of what could be, how could we build a more compassionate, just, equitable, sustainable world that takes into account all living beings?
Yes, that is the question. And the thing that is so ironic about it at this time as well is that, many of us have been on a path and together to trying to create that possibility. And yet, with this current initiation, it seems, both more desperately needed and also more out of reach, because even though, we're all sheltering at home and everything, the larger drivers of the society, the government, the media, the, allied forces, they continue to function and drive on and make decisions, without regard And so obviously that can be very galvanizing. But people are actually, through this whole process, isolated, siloed, and, in a much more disempowered role. We can't take to the streets, for example, and other things. So, I'm not trying to play devil's advocate here, but I'm just pointing out how, challenging it is to conceive of this as an initiation into, something that is good and what we want, because usually when we kind of undertake healing practice of any kind, it's always in the hope of and in the service of higher goals. But it's ironically, it's the call to that now, and to see this as that opportunity is ever more challenging, because it's actually occurring in a time of, narrowing or at least temporarily, where we are today as we have this conversation in March with, the everyone hunkering at home to limit the spread of the virus. And of course that could potentially be different in a number of months. But to see this as an initiation to a hopeful scenario is both very inviting, and it's, wouldn't that be fantastic? And it's also, we need to have more pictures of what that would look like, because it's really seeming like the opposite right now.
Well, right. So
ordinary
I'll say
vision.
a few things. Yeah, I'll say a few things about that. One thing is, I want to make sure I remember all three. One thing is, that, and this is to play devil's advocate a little bit to you.
Good.
To what you said is that really many people, if not most people, when we did have all of this freedom and we weren't hunkering down at home and we weren't, restricted in that way, actually weren't taking to the streets either. And, I would just say, not to say that many of us aren't being active, aren't, advocating and putting out our messages in the way that we are, all of that. But in a sense, and this is something I've been, really wrangling with myself, is, by showing up every day and living life, in the way that we do, we're upholding a system that actually many of us really have a problem with at a fundamental level. And it's very hard to know how to extract ourselves from that. But now we've, in certain ways, really been extracted. It wasn't of our own volition, but we've been extracted. And I think one of the things about healing journeys that I've seen both as a doctor and in my spiritual work that I've done, for myself and with others, is they rarely look pretty. They rarely look easy. And at the beginning, very often there's a sense of fear and terror and worry that you're never going to be okay, that we're not going to make it through, in the beginning. It feels, the uncertainty and this sense of sort of stepping off the cliff is, or having been pushed off the cliff, is very intense. So, it isn't that it's so simple to be able to foresee exactly how this path is going to look. And I don't, certainly, I'm not saying that this is, there's a formula and it's, going to look like this and that it's going to be easy. But another thing I would say too is that, what I am really holding space for here and what I teach about in my program is the idea of working thinking and working in nonlinear ways. So, you were saying in the very beginning when you were talking about your program and connecting the dots, which is such a perfect, name for what you were talking about, and I think it's something that I do too, is taking a lot of disparate topics. Like, when I show people a book idea or, anything, they always say, oh, so many different things you're talking about, and it's sort of the idea of how do we bring together lots of different disparate ideas and wisdom and science and, practice and from different areas and bring them together in this multidisciplinary way to create something new, a new perspective, a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, a new way of living. So here we are in this position now, and one of the things I'm starting to see already glimpses of what could be, right? I mean, we don't yet know what it will be, but we know what could be. And what I'm seeing, just as some small examples, I'm seeing a lot of people now planting gardens, asking, how can I plant food? They're thinking about the food system, which is something I've been talking about for decades, and I know you have also been talking about, thinking about, where can I get seeds and how do I plant them and how can I prepare food? What do I do with a turnip? I've never really cooked those before, whatever. So people are thinking about where their food comes from, sourcing seeds, how to plant, connecting with soil and earth, how do they prepare their food? And this is maybe something they've thought about before and maybe not. So there is this whole freedom garden or victory garden idea that's kind of coming to life that's very powerful, I think, and transformative for many people. I think this is something that can't go back, to where we were before. People are now thinking about the food chain in a way they never did. That's one example. I'm looking also at, the kind of creativity that's coming up from medical teams and scientific teams. So I just saw that at Rice University, a team there put together in a very short time using a 3D printer and, very inexpensive parts, a ventilator that's only $300 to make that might not be for the sickest people, but could support people who are in less dire circumstances that might support them, that might be able to be produced in some way. So, and I could go on. I mean, look at also, like I saw pictures from someone in Boulder where there were bobcats just walking the streets of Boulder because so many people were indoors that they have pictures in their yard, and the animals are just walking freely. And people are saying in Wuhan, for the first time, they heard birds singing, in years and years, because normally it's so polluted, and we're seeing the smog lifting over areas because of the lack of, production. So I think, these are glimpses. This is not, set in stone, right? Like the future that we're moving towards has to do with each of us and the actions each of us take and the thoughts each of us have, and us all being present for this and engaging in it. But I think the possibilities are flashing in the future, so we can see them and be drawn to them and take steps in that direction. And I think, I think that's very powerful. That's a very powerful, in a sense, very powerful place to be able to see these glimpses. And then the question is, rather than thinking of ourselves as isolated from each other, in certain ways, of course, we are, is to be thinking about how we can connect. And I would say, interestingly, in the past 2 weeks, I've probably been in contact with more family members and more friends than I've, directly and kind of quote unquote randomly than I have in maybe the last year. I mean, and it's not that I'm not in connection with people. I'm not a hermit, but, you know, people reaching out and saying, how are you? What's happening? You know, just this sense of connection. So
yes.
I think it really has to do with how we want to frame it for ourselves and where we're kind of willing to walk. But of course, there is a big, you know, we are in this place of uncertainty. And I actually would say one more thing. I think when we're in this place of fear, you know, where a lot of people are kind of trying to shut that down and say, oh, like fear is going to suppress your immune system and, you know, all these kinds of, you know, it's like, I don't know what they want from people. Like, hello, emotions are valid things and they come up. Of course, we don't want to get on the fear train and ride off, you know, the cliff, but we, you know, I actually think that where we are right now is in a state of release. Like, I think we've been walking around with a lot of fear, but we suppress it and we compartmentalize it and we, you know, design a whole life around avoiding that fear and not having to face that fear. And here we are having to confront it in, you know, some of our greatest fears are right in front of our face right now, and there's nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. And while that feels so terrible and uncomfortable, you know, it's also this opportunity, in a sense, to release all of this fear and come to terms in some way, you know, piece by piece, step by step. It doesn't happen magically. It's not simple, but, you know, to kind of get to know it and maybe it becomes, you know, a little less scary. I read this poem today on a Facebook Live and an Instagram Live I did called The Guest House by Rumi. And in it, he talks about entertaining all of the different unexpected visitors. And he's talking about feelings. And he says, you know, it may be clearing you out for some new delight.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think I really am completely with you on, you know, on that because, you know, I mean, there is actually, this is obviously frightening for people. I mean, there's no question about that. But it's also true that having, you know, being in this position of giving over the authority, you know, for the running of our society to people who do not cherish human or other life, are not humane or forgiving or understanding that, you know, different people need or feel different ways about different things is actually quite terrifying. And then that very terror then drives us toward, you know, another group of people who, you know, are paying lip service but are very mixed in their ability to follow through. So all of this is actually frightening. So, you know, and then our lives, our healthcare system, our educational system, the future of our children and all of that hangs in the balance. But, you know, as we get kind of in tune to just sort of run with that, because that sort of seems like the best bet. You know, the fact is we've been carrying a lot of fear, outrage, and all kinds of emotions all along, you know. And so also sitting with our fear, working from home, helping to educate our children, being with people, connecting with people we know, all of that is actually, you know, it's bringing that to the fore, and it's actually providing an opportunity to deal with what has been there all along. So in a sense, I do see what you're talking about there, even though I was kind of, you know, playing devil's advocate with you around some of that. So yeah, that's all. There is opportunity in all of that. And I've had the same experience of connecting with a lot of different people. It's like everybody wants to kind of touch base and, you know, kind of like rediscover our connections with people and stuff like that and make sure that we're connected at this time. what are some of, you're leading a training, a 6-month immersion into indigenous and earth-based approaches. What kinds of indigenous, studies have you yourself done that you're bringing to that kind of work?
Well, so I'll tell you a moment about my own one of my own periods of initiation. So my 3 children are all real spiritual teachers to me. I do think children can very much do that for us. And my youngest is, I kind of call him my highest spiritual teacher because he's really in a sense been my muse in this journey that I've been on. Always kind of calls me in the direction I need to go in. So he first got sick as a 1-year-old, and my journey of kind of helping him, trying to kind of solve the mystery of what was going on with him, which had turned out to be a severe soy allergy, which took me into where does food come from, and GMOs and pesticides and soil, and brought me to writing my book, The Dirt Cure. That was sort of the first leg of my journey as a parent, as a physician, and then the second leg was many years ago. After we had gotten his food good and we had him on, botanicals and gotten him outside more and, fresh food and all the different things that we, that I did to help him to heal, we found mold in our apartment and moved out for 5 months when they gutted a certain area that had actually, it turned out, was making him sick again. And we moved back in. And he, about 2 weeks later, the whole place had been, the epicenter was the bathroom, and it had been totally gutted to the studs. Everything had been cleaned. We had gotten rid of, all of our upholstered furniture. I mean, it was extreme and clean. And we came back, and he went to take a shower 2 weeks later and had a seizure in that room. Thankfully, was not yet in the shower and had never had a seizure before. And, knock wood, hasn't had one since, but I came to him, and was holding him afterwards. And of course, it was really terrifying in that moment. And the one thing that I knew more deeply than anything was this wasn't a physical problem, because I was really I was one of the only at that time integrative pediatric neurologists in the world doing, botanicals and food and nutrition and mind body and, all the different kind of arms. And he was getting all that kind of support. And I knew this was not a physical illness. It was a spiritual illness, that it was something that I didn't yet have the tools to treat and that I had to learn them. And that was like this epiphany that I had in that moment, where I just knew that there was something more going on. And so I went through a journey I won't get into all the details of, but I found a woman who was a PhD in ethnobotany and a 4th-generation shaman, and I followed her to Ecuador, and I studied there with her and different indigenous communities, and then started to study after that with other indigenous communities and with other teachers from Africa. My family comes from Morocco and the Atlas Mountains, and so I started to learn more about African healing as well in my own culture. And in the process, what I learned is that in indigenous communities, there's a whole different paradigm about what physical healing looks like, and it really is broader. So first of all, we're all considered to have a physical, emotional, and spiritual body, and all of them need care. Now, in our society, we really have no language around our spiritual body, as anything. I mean, there's sort of a religious component to it, but that's not what they're talking about. It's not religious. It's something, inherent to each of us. And in this paradigm, when we're not in good spiritual health or good emotional health, then we're not in good physical health. Physical health is downstream. What's upstream is our spiritual and emotional health, okay? So that was very important, kind of awareness to have. And then good health has to do, and when I say health, it's something larger than just, our physical body and how we feel, but the health of ourselves, our families, our homes, our communities, our world. Okay, so that has to do with each of us. And it comes from being in good relationship with ourselves, with those around us, and with our place, with the land, the living beings, and the land of where we are. So this whole picture, is what kind of became clear to me as I went deeper and deeper into my own initiation, as I studied with my different teachers over the years. Where I went and I learned with the communities and learned from the elders of those communities and was given permission to share certain, knowledge and bring that to the communities here, to my students. So once I was able to put that together, I started to really understand how, first, obviously, I knew from very early on in my medical training what was really missing there. But what I was able to do was to access certain parts of myself that had really been shut down from almost childhood because, the time I spent with plants and, kind of interacting and making my little potions and things that I did and that we think of as childlike things to do that were actually very real. I think children actually have incredible knowledge and we talk about the indigenous mind. It's a whole different way of thinking about and confronting situations and problems and interacting, is thinking about, in a much more comprehensive and cohesive way and collective way. If we talk about thinking about 7 generations ahead, that's one example, but also thinking about all living beings in the decisions that we make, and not just, it sounds overwhelming if it's not something we're already doing, but it's actually not, because we're part of the community and we're all interconnected in this way. So, my own journey that I thought was actually about, healing my son in a certain sense. That's how it began, or that was my awakening. That was my initiation, that beginning. But what it ended up being was a healing of myself, for one thing, and of course, I think as many of us know, hopefully know, but has definitely become clear to me doing the spiritual work and spiritual kind of guiding that I do with my clients, my patients, and my students, is that, in order for us to heal the world, we have to start by healing ourselves. Everything is a mirror. So, and I felt that way when Donald Trump was elected. I thought, okay, we've chosen the hard medicine to take. We could have chosen a different, perhaps, could have chosen some other way of taking this medicine, and maybe, we could have had, let's say, access to healthcare for all, and higher education available for free or for very inexpensive, and forgiveness of student loans, right? That could have been an option for us in some way. And this was the medicine we chose. And there was something, it seemed clear to me at the time, and I'm not glib about this, because it's obviously caused a tremendous amount of suffering for a lot of people, a lot of us, and especially people who don't have privilege in this, under the auspices of this administration and in this country. So I'm in no way, being sort of glib and spiritual about it. But in fact, it seems to me there's a big healing that needed to happen when he came into office, and that he was going to come, and he has been the ugliest, and I'm, obviously being very clear about my position on this, but really bringing kind of the ugliest parts of any one of us in the most visible way, and even the politics, right? I mean, he's so open about his kind of quid pro quo position on things. Yeah. It's like that. We've known that has happened. in politics behind closed doors. He's opened all the doors. We see all of it. We're seeing everything hanging out. And how can we, it's so galvanizing in many ways and so awakening and, to really see it so clearly. We are finding, I think what it's doing is kind of forcing us to look at the ugliness of what is happening in our country and in our world and committing to yanking it out by the roots.
Yes. So, I mean, I don't know that we're making that commitment, but we are seeing it. And it's kind of interesting because, some people see it, but it's also possible to hang out, and kind of avoid seeing it if you, are not looking to the places that are shining a light. But with this whole thing, people are now, and so it kind of reinforces your point in a way, people are now experiencing it, so they're coming from a place where, there's an experience that is looming and that some people are having and others are, seeking to avoid and all of that, which is, this health experience. And so, and that's different from both a cognitive but not lived knowledge or a cognitive denial and not lived knowledge, so there is a progression there. So it's really interesting. I'm now beginning to kind of catch your view of, how our choices have created a kind of progression. And even though it's kind of the progression that from a preventive strategy viewpoint, which is, how many of us think in terms of both healthcare, how can we prevent or lessen something? And also we can think that way politically, how can we prevent climate change through, on earth honoring practices and other kinds of things. But, we're kind of moving. Prevention, I believe, is always and still possible. But, we're getting to see what is on the other side of prevention. And it, and not only see, but to experience, So, yeah, I'm really warming to the whole idea of this is an initiation, in a sense. How do you, what is your training about? You're doing this Terrain Institute Shetreat certification program. As we've mentioned, 6 months of indigenous and earth-based approaches and tools. How does that work? What is it an online program? Who's participating? What kinds of tools are you offering?
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically, my, and I think one of the things that does happen during these periods of time, and it did happen for me during my own individual process of initiation that I began to describe before, is, you can get these epiphanies. Like I'm telling people, wow, keep a journal nearby or, be ready to record into your phone or however you like to do that, because there are going to be things that you're going to realize that are just going to kind of come through for you all of a sudden. And, these are things that are, you may not be able to access them again. And during these periods of time, we suddenly can have like a kind of vision that we wouldn't normally have. So for me, I was called to do something, which was to bring this wisdom to more people. And I think there are a lot of people who have a sense that the world could be something different, better, more compassionate, more just than it is.
Yes.
And they've had their ideas dismissed or belittled or ridiculed. They felt isolated or lonely or like the only one who sees what needs to be done to build this world, And they know they have these gifts, and it feels like they can't access them to bring them out on a larger scale to make the kind of changes they wanted to make. So for me, what I felt I was called to do was to create a container which is this 6-month program. And in it, there's community, there's mentorship, and then there's this certification where we explore basically how to work to be in alignment with the wisdom of the earth, kind of getting back into our indigenous minds, rewilding. And I can talk a little more about what that looks like, kind of looking at how we got to where we are right now, and then how to put it all together, each individually for themselves, because, you know, what that looks like for each person is different, to become a heart-led leader, that healer leader I talked about in the beginning, where, you know, we've come through these challenging times. How are we going to be able to become heart-led leaders to build and bring in this new world that's calling to be born? So some of the things that we explore are, you know, it's online. It's available to, you know, anyone, anywhere in the world. We've had people from Australia and the Philippines and Germany and all over the world. And it's for all people. So, you know, there have been many doctors and healthcare workers in it, but that's only been about maybe half or a little less than half of the people who have done the training. We've had professors, we've had entrepreneurs, we actually have someone who was previously a startup kind of Wharton grad, you know, corporate kind of person who was interested in climate change work, and she's running for New York City Council now after going through our program. She decided that she was called to do that. You know, we had a media mogul, you know, someone who ran a publishing company who did it. So we've had all different kinds of really interesting people. And what we do is we explore, first of all, what are the gifts that we have as sensitive and compassionate people? You know, because there is this view in our world as it stands right now that, you know, it's all about being productive and being hardcore and being efficient and being, you know, but really like looking at what gifts we bring, you know, looking at the science of intuition, looking at the heart-brain connection. There's a beautiful body of science. And this is, you know, looking both, I'm obviously, you know, have a science background, and I'm a little bit of, you know, like a science geek. So on the one hand, I like to bring in science in an accessible way, you know, and ground it in that, which is a language a lot of us understand, but at the same time bring in kind of also ancient wisdom, earth-based wisdom, and kind of marry the two. So we're looking at the science of the heart-brain connection, and what role does intuition have in leadership? What role does being compassionate have in leadership in this coming world? What role is it, you know, what role do we have bringing in things like the rights of the earth? And we look at the science and wisdom of plant consciousness, and we look at the science and wisdom of animal consciousness. We talk about master and teacher plants like psychedelics. We have a whole module on the science and sacred of psychedelics, you know, and kind of looking at the ins and outs of that. So there's a whole context. I talk actually about the European witch hunts quite a bit. We do a deep dive into what happened at that time, because that was another very initiatory experience over actually a couple of centuries, not just, you know, all at in one deep moment, where, you know, women, wise women, herbalists, midwives, elders were attacked. But at that same time, there was also the beginning of really aggressive colonialism and slavery and the attack of indigenous people, and also at that very same time, that very same period, the birth of the modern scientific method and the work of Descartes kind of coming in and separating us in a certain way from the earth, creating this false separation that we are observers and that, you know, nature is separate from us, which is, you know, something that's really being debunked. So, you know, I believe in a sense that we're still, in this post-witchcraft, post-witch hunt period, in a sense, in post-witch hunt era, and that we need to actually, sometimes being able to look at it gives us a little bit of a sense of how do we free ourselves, how do we move through and transform it. So these are the kinds of topics that we explore, and then there are meditations. I believe very deeply that, we are all so encouraged to stay in our heads and be very cerebral about everything. And in a sense, that actually allows us to keep a distance from what we need to do, and sometimes doesn't really hold us accountable for the emotions that come up and the work that needs to be done. So, we do meditations to I sort of think of it as a head, heart, hands, heal, right? So head is our lectures, heart is meditation, hands is rituals that we do using plants, working, with ancestors, doing a lot of nature-based, and that doesn't mean we have to be outside for all of it. If we can't easily get outside, there are ways to do it in your home, but all of these rituals that we do each month. And then heal. How do we hold ourselves accountable to heal ourselves, heal our communities, and heal the world in a heart-led way?
That's beautiful. That really sounds wonderful. How do people get in touch with you if they want to participate or learn more?
So basically the best way is to go to my website, which is drmaya.com, drmaya.com/certification. We're actually open for registration now. And, they can go there and learn more about the details. And also, I'm offering for a little bit longer a free training on earth-based practices for challenging times, tools to navigate challenging times. And that is at drmaya, drmaya.com/webinar. So those are two ways that people can learn more about this, and obviously reach out if they have questions or, thoughts, or are wondering if this is right for them.
Wonderful. It's a great opportunity for people to, kind of get onto a new track within themselves and in relation to all that we're aligned with, and to kind of realign or check our alignment, or, all of that, as well as find
and I think we're in such a changing period.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us, the economy is changing, the world is changing, and, what I really was kind of at first a little, wondering, well, do I open registration right now? Feels, it's such an uncertain time, but I actually think, we also bring in guest experts. We have weekly calls and trainings that are, recorded if people can't be there, so they can watch them anytime. But we bring in people who actually can teach about leadership and getting work online, amplifying your message in different ways, so that, we can kind of think outside of the box in terms of how we're going to show up as leaders and amplify our work and our messages.
Wow, that's fantastic. That sounds really, really wonderful. And also the earth-based practices, I think, are really important and grounding right now, given, the fact that this microbe has come and is circling the earth, and, it's, I think it's really an important time to do that. Can you, we have about not too much more time before the show closing, maybe 5 minutes or so, but could you just share your understanding of, the best way for people to, approach the current pandemic according to your perspective? We can skip things like hand washing, that have already been said a million times. But, what is how do you look on it, and what do you, recommending people, understand or do? And anything that you would have to offer in that regard. It doesn't have to be a complete plan or anything like that, obviously, in 5 minutes.
Of course. My point of view, and, this is why I called my institute the Terrain Institute, is, and I write about this in my book, The Dirt Cure, as well, is, we're not just sitting ducks waiting around for something to come get us. There's a lot, I could get into germ theory. We could do a whole nother conversation about it, and sort of the flaws in germ theory, which is not to say that there's not right now we are contending with a virus and we need to pay attention. We need to wash our hands. We need to do, we do need to stay apart physically, all of those things. But we're not just here kind of waiting for something to get us. There are very science-based, actually, ways, and I talk about this on, my social media, my Instagram, my Facebook, and on my emails for people who are on my email list, obviously, as well as with my patients, about just basic things like nutrients, eating lots of vegetables, not eating a lot of sugar or drinking a lot of alcohol right now, which for some people I know is very challenging because those are places that we might go when we feel stressed. But, minimizing ways that we suppress our immune system, maximizing really good nutrition, that's profound. Eating things and drinking things that are bitter actually stimulates the immune system in your ear, nose, throat, and in your digestive tract. So you're actually protecting yourself from the virus when you, are eating like dark leafy greens, when you have a little bit of coffee. Actually, that's a bitter tonic. There are actually herbal bitter tonics. Drinking a very strong cup of chamomile tea or dandelion root tea. These are also ways that we can stimulate that bitter kind of activation of our immune systems. Taking a good multi-mineral and multivitamin, making sure that you're getting vitamin D orally if you're not able to get outside, or even if you are able to get outside. Doing that little extra boost for yourself, making sure that you're nutritionally sufficient, that your reserve is built. This is all about building the terrain, and we do it physically and emotionally and spiritually. And as I was saying earlier, all of those things are important. But right now in this moment, thinking about the physical terrain and building that, making yourself more resilient, is, I think, one of the most important things you can do. One of the best things I've found, believe it or not, for my patients who have had this, and I've guided them through it, is fresh ginger tea. So cutting up, about a thumb or a little larger than a thumb-sized piece of ginger, boiling it in water for like 10 to 20 minutes, boiling it and then simmering it, and then put a little honey in it and just drink that all day long. That has been one of the most healing practices for the people who are dealing with the respiratory symptoms of this illness, believe it or not, along with doing the nutrients like we discussed. So there are very clear ways to build the terrain, and that's what's going to help people, I believe.
Thank you. That's terrific. So that's just wonderful. Thank you for offering that too, so people get that kind of takeaway. It's been wonderful having you on the show, Maya Shetreat, and people, please do go to drmaya.com and look at her terrain course and her other offerings and get more information. And it's just been wonderful having you on again. We've had this. We've done the show before, and I also did an interview with you offline that kind of was the foundation of some articles I did on regenerative agriculture. So you truly, have been a pioneer on connecting the dots between food, the earth, and health, and it's great. You can also look for The Dirt Cure, Maya's book, for more about her work in this regard, listeners. So thank you so much, Maya, for being with us today. And it's just been a joy to have you. And
it's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really been fun. We'll be, we'll be talking more, I'm sure, on Facebook and elsewhere. As this is the time of conversations. It seems like more and more. Which for me, it's always been the time of conversations. But it's great, and I love what you said about that too, and how important it is for people to be reaching out and connecting. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. We'll be back next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Radio Network. Be well, stay healthy, be safe, and I usually say keep marching forward in company with all our relations, but I think now we'll say please sit alone and please sit at home comfortably with all our relations. Until next time, thank you. It's been great being with you all this week. I'm Alison Rose Levy, here with Connect the Dots. Be well. Well,